Tracing Your Family Roots. My name is Arlene Sachs, this is Chuck Mason, and today we're delighted to welcome Leslie Anderson. Leslie, welcome. Leslie is a reference librarian at the Alexandria Library, and she's in the Special Collections branch, and she's come to talk to us about a contest she won. She won the National Genealogical Society Family History Writing Contest.
That's
and
right.
I'm so anxious to hear more about this. I never even heard of the contest, but welcome and tell us how you began in genealogy and how you got into this.
Thank you, thank you. Well, I think like in most families, it's the women who hold on to the stories. But with this project, I was in a conversation with my mother, and I knew things about my mother's family, having grown up in my hometown of Norfolk, Virginia. But we were talking about her grandfather, who was one of the last African-American blacksmiths in our hometown. And I asked her where he was born. She remembered going to his funeral when she was a teenager. But when I asked her where he was born, she didn't know. And that was the beginning. So the first document I asked for was this death certificate. And that's really how it started going.
And the death certificate told you where he was born?
It did. It told me that he was born in Boynton, Virginia. I had no idea where Boynton was, so I was learning a lot about the geography of the Commonwealth. And it also reported that his father was R. Smith, and his mother's name was T. George. Well, I quickly scratched Smith from the options of researching first, and so I began to look at who this T. George person was.
Well, you're lucky that the death certificate was all accurate, because I have so many that are so wrong.
It turned out to be, yes.
And so, who was T. George?
T. George, wow. T. George turned out to be Tabitha George, a woman who was born enslaved in about 1838 to a wealthy tobacco-growing family. One of the things that happened in her youth was that although this family was quite wealthy, owning close to 800 acres of property, more than 20 people, the man died fairly young and did not leave a will. He was also in considerable debt. That was a classic scenario when enslaved people were subject to be sold in order to pay off the debt. She was not one of the people to be sold. There was a court case that involved the widow, the surviving children. And when the settlement was made, she was one of the people who remained the property of that family. She was subsequently given to one of the daughters and lived the rest of her years as a servant. That was the term used, as a servant to this woman. Eventually, at the end of the Civil War, 4 million people in America were emancipated, and she was close to 50 years old when she bought 16 acres of land from her former owner in her own name. So she was the mother of my great-grandfather.
She must have been earning some money or gotten money somewhere if she could buy the land.
But that was not uncommon. It appears that her family lived in proximity to the former slave owner. Because when you look at the census documents, the 1870 and the 1880 census schedules and also the agricultural schedules, there are formerly enslaved people and free blacks who have property ranging from 20 to 60 acres. And so they grew their own crops, they raised their own livestock, and they had income from that.
Oh.
Now, there may have been other skills that we're not aware of for which she was paid. She might have been a seamstress, her daughter might have been a laundress, and there was certainly a source of income on their own.
And then how did she meet her husband?
We don't know. Slave marriages were not recognized as legal unions. She did, however, have 2 extended relationships. One was with a free man, and although he was a free man, her children from that union were born enslaved because, as was the law, the children followed the status of the mother. That man falls off the records in about 1863. He might have died, he might have moved away. I have not been able to confirm if he enlisted in the United States Colored Troops. Shortly after that time, she entered into a second long-term union with a man about 15 years older than she, a Richard Smith. He is the R. Smith on that death certificate from my ancestor. She had 13 documented children, and my great-grandfather is the youngest of those. He was born in 1877 in Boyden, Mecklenburg County, Virginia.
And so, you've mentioned the blacksmith. So I'm sure as a part of this, that was a family tradition, and we all have family traditions that we like to believe are true, but sometimes we prove no, they're not true. What was the case with your family?
Well, you're right. It turned out not so. I thought, well, he must have been a blacksmith. He went to Norfolk, and it turned out, like many people from rural areas, many families, people go to where the jobs are. I eventually identified 3. There were 3 of these men, Richard, his brother James, and another brother Richard, who lived in Norfolk. My great-grandfather turned out not to be the last African-American blacksmith, but he did have a successful business. I found him in the records, and I was fortunate enough to find a newspaper profile of him that was published in the 1930s. And he made an audacious statement that the horse will never be replaced by the automobile. The horse will never be replaced by the automobile. It did turn out, according to that article, he was the last African-American blacksmith who shoed horses and mules. In part of the research, I went to city directories. He died in 1939, and so I followed city directories into the 40s, and there were, in fact, other blacksmiths with the little asterisk for colored, that was the custom then, who were in the blacksmithing business.
So part of the story was true, and
part of the story was true.
Was not. So then you
you won this award. How did?
That's what I was.
How did you decide? Did you just say, I'm going to write a story and publish it and try to enter it, or?
Well, yes. That was pretty much it. When I started working at Alexandria Library in 2002, I'd had my library degree for a few years by that time. I was helping other people find their family history. And it quickly dawned on me that I could begin the same systematic search and organize things in a way and not walk around with it in my head. And as a part of that professional development and my personal growth, I began to attend conferences like those in the Washington, D.C. area. And I heard about the National Genealogical Society. I joined it along with some other societies. And I took some writing courses. And one of the writing courses I took was at an institute in Birmingham, Alabama. And it was taught by Dr. Thomas Jones. It was a writing and publishing course. And I got the idea that this is a journal of substance. This is something I've learned from, and they have an annual contest. And I have a story. I have a story I want to tell. I think it's a story that people will enjoy, a story that people can learn from. And if I'm in it, I'm going to win it. And it was a project for several years, and lots of up and down, and it's very satisfying. I'm really happy about it.
One of the things for our viewers' information, they may not be familiar, the National Genealogical Society's quarterly, which Leslie's article was published in, is a teaching journal. Most of the articles that are in there are aimed at looking at what people have done to research their family. And people say, well, I don't have ancestors here or there. But if you use this as a teaching tool, you can often look at what did the person use for records and go and use those types of records. Reading Leslie's article myself, I've thought, oh, yeah, that might be a possibility. Of course, you had great success with city directories, which is something I've used often.
It's city directories. There's nothing else like city directories, especially the more recent ones, where once you have an address of your own ancestor, and the more recent ones, perhaps from the 60s, depending on the city. You can go to the back, you can look at the street address,
Yes.
and you can find out who the neighbors are.
But they have, and I want to put in a note for the rest of the world. There are city directories from all over the world, going back quite far,
Yes.
long before, and a city directory would be before the telephone books.
Of course.
So you go back into the mid-1800s, even early 1800s.
Early 1800s, yeah.
That in the rest of the world, because we have found them, and those are available. Maybe they're online now. Everything seems to be online, but I know the Library of Congress has many from all around the
And
world.
of course, one of the things I always was told was, well, telephone directories came along, and so they stopped discontinuing them. And I don't know whether I've told Leslie this, but I happened to be down there in the Special Collections Library where she works years ago and discovered I'm in a city directory for the city of Alexandria that she has there in the library. I bought a condo in 1976, and I'm in the 1977 directory.
That's your paper trail right there.
When do they do city directories at all anymore? I mean, I wouldn't think so.
The nature of them has changed.
Yeah.
The nature of them has changed.
Yeah, I mean, everything's online as far as finding people now.
Well, not so much as this. The publishing companies do them in a different way. So they are now leased to users like libraries. So when one is returned, you get the new one, but then you have to return the old one.
Yeah.
Now, the research in this article involved a rural area. And I had to go back to government documents at the local, state, and national level to get information about these families.
And one of the things, since I've read the article, it wasn't just a rural area. Part of the family ended up in New York. And so you were dealing with both segments of research, out in the country and a large city.
What did you go to, historical societies or the county records, or what did you?
Well, I would say all of the above.
Oh, okay.
I traveled to Boynton several times. I made many trips to the Library of Virginia. Of course, I'm exhausting the records in my hometown. I visited a 90-year-old cousin on Long Island for a weekend. I went to the courthouse at the other end of the island. I visited a courthouse in Queens. I made the rounds. I mean, phone calls and emails.
Did you also do or take advantage of borrowing anything through interlibrary loan?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a librarian, that's what I do. In this case, it was not so much books in this time, but microfilm. I borrowed microfilm from the Library of Virginia because they have education records. And one of the granddaughters of Tabitha became a school teacher in Boynton, and there are records that show her name, her term of employment, and her salary, and so I was able to determine from those records, it was a clue as to when she left Boynton and went to New York.
Are those records also available at the Family History Center?
I don't know. I would imagine they could be borrowed through.
You can't borrow, I mean, you can send them to a local Family History Center. You can't take them out of there.
Right.
I had mine sent directly to my home library.
It depends on what they have in their collection. It's certainly worth looking at the Family History Library catalog online to see what's there, and then going to your public library and visiting the interlibrary loan department to order things, because there's borrowing things from all over the country, and possibly, I don't know, you may know, can you borrow things from foreign countries?
It depends on your library system.
Depends on the library system.
It depends.
And so, that's a great advantage of not having to go and visit all of these places, which
I bet you there are people
sometimes
that
it makes it impossible.
I bet you there are people that don't even know that there's such a thing exists.
I didn't know for many years.
I didn't either, that you could borrow things. Now, I wanted something. I found something in a footnote of something I was researching, and I wanted a book, and it must be so rare. They said, "Why do you want it?" And I told them which pages that it had referenced, and rather than sending me the whole book, they copied out those 3 pages for me and sent me those 3 pages. Now, of course, they probably scan them and email them to me, but this was a long time ago.
So how long did the whole project take you?
Well, let's be fair. I started working at the Special Collections Branch in 2002, although I'd had my degree in library science for several years. I had that conversation with my mother in 2003. I took Dr. Jones' class in 2008. I think it was in 2008, and I started writing then. I didn't write every day, and I kept at it. I was doing researching and writing and different kinds of research and different kinds of writings, and every December 31st for several years I attempted to make the contest deadline, and for the first 5 years I missed it.
And how did you manage the project? You know, you were writing, were you doing this on a computer? Were you doing it longhand?
Mm-hmm.
How did you organize, because I'm sure you gathered stuff?
Well, let's say housekeeping, I'm okay with having clutter. I'm okay with that. I start writing in longhand.
Oh my God.
But if there's something about the feel of the pen, it's got to be a ballpoint pen on a yellow legal pad. There's something about it that feels right to me. And I can write notes to myself, and I can squiggle things and do diagrams, and then I put it in a Word document, and then I edit it, and then I rename it. And in terms of the files and the folders, it was madness. You know, I was making it up as I went along. I was making lists of folders. I had print folders. I had electronic folders. I had to-do list. I had checklist. I had tote bags with different branches of the family. This family is here, and this family is in that tote bag. And by the time I had submitted the entry, I stopped counting after 47 revisions. I just stopped counting. But I felt really good about it. I felt
Now,
really good.
when you were doing this, were you letting anyone else read any of this, give you advice? Were you totally doing this on your own?
I didn't want to show it to anyone for the longest time.
Not even Mother?
No. My mother never read it until we were at the conference, and she read my entry then. But I would be at the Library of Virginia, and I would say, "Ma, guess what?" You know, I'm out in the lobby. I would have called her, or I'm in Boynton, and I would call her, or I would say, "Guess what I found?" or "Guess who did this?" You know, and so there were a couple of friends, call them Team Tabitha, great friends of mine, and every now and then I'd talk with them about what's going on, or you know, this page isn't working for me. And, well, you know, Leslie, you could or could not, you know, but there was no final edit, there was no final review.
And of course, that's one of the rules of the contest, that you really don't. But, you know, I'm sure that anybody entering, you know, will have somebody look at a part of some of their entries.
I would have to say that, and if it was not something that was submitted in toto to anyone for a professional edit or review.
So then...
So were there some surprises along the way? Anything that really, not you, that...
Well, yeah, there were a couple, in addition to this blacksmith being interviewed by the Norfolk Journal and Guide and making this outrageous statement. There was a granddaughter, the woman, Tabitha's granddaughter, who became a teacher, was involved in community affairs in Englewood, New Jersey. Her husband was a military veteran. She was active in the community, and she was head of the Women's Auxiliary of the American Legion. This was not uncommon for middle class and aspiring middle class people to do. But what happened was, in one of their events, they invited Mary McLeod Bethune to talk to their community. This was in the 1950s. Dr. McLeod was one of the kitchen cabinet for Roosevelt. She had established a college in Florida. She was known internationally for her humanitarian stance. And the Englewood City Council and School Board rescinded their invitation once she had accepted it and the arrangements had been made. My ancestor, young Tabitha Davis, was called to a meeting, and she was told that Dr. Bethune would not the invitation had been rescinded because Dr. Bethune was a communist. McCarthy era. And it was a shock. It was a shock. It was a disappointment. The NAACP got involved. The event was then rescheduled at another venue in Inglewood. The city council and school board apologized and asked for the event back, and the women's auxiliary said no.
No.
This has made national news. This has made national news in the African American press. And but it's interesting to that I found correspondence between young Tabitha and Dr. Bethune in the house where where Dr. Bethune's papers are kept. It's in a house managed by the National Park Service.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Great. So then you said you've missed the deadline a couple of years.
More than a couple.
What was the final?
Well, you know, I on the final, I actually drove it to the post office. I had it hand stamped on that date in December. It was an unbelievable relief. I went to my car, I called my mom, I called my friends, and I said, it is done. You know, it is done. In the years before, a number of things had happened. There was that Christmas that I gave IOUs because I was so focused. You know, there was no time, there was no time for shopping. There were several months, months at a time. I was going on 4 hours of sleep and working a full-time job and, research and writing this. I was a little driven.
I would say so. I would say so. So December the 31st was the deadline. How long was the wait?
Oh, geez. Oh, no. You're going to make me tell this story. You're going to make me tell this story. I think there's, I think in the guidelines, which are available on the NGS page, on the website, I expected to hear something in about March or April. I think maybe March 31st was the deadline. So as March is coming, I'm thinking, okay, I haven't heard anything, but I've done my best. I felt really good about the project. I had finished it a couple years in different ways, but it didn't feel good. It was okay, it was solid. And so I'm at a conference. I'm at the Fairfax Genealogical Society conference in the spring, and we're in a break between my lectures, and I see this person come down the hall, and he peeks in, and it's Chuck Mason. It's Chuck Mason. And he leans over to me and he says, it's okay if I tell this story.
Sure.
Okay. He leans over to me and he says, Leslie, did you get my email? And I said, no, what email? And he says, you didn't get my email? And I said, no. He said, my email about your article. And I'm holding my breath. I said, what article? And Chuck says, your article won the Family History Writing Contest. It was a television moment. I started screaming and jumping up and down. I said, Chuck, can I hug you? And by this time he says, well, we're really not ready to make it public yet. I'm thinking, okay. And I went out to my car and I called my mother, and Chuck is the chairman of the awards committee.
And we send out the notifications by email. And of course, when I sent Leslie's out, I knew Leslie knew me, and I thought I would get some kind of a response, and I didn't.
I was raised right.
Didn't get any kind of a response, and so I was wondering. And of course,
is that your family on there? I don't
yes,
interrupt
actually, that's her mother in the middle, and her daughter and her son.
Yeah,
with Leslie. That was at the National Genealogical Society conference where she actually got the award. But it was exciting for me because I got to actually see the reaction of a winner, where all I get normally is emails back. And so, the whole experience I know was a great one for Leslie. Mm-hmm. The other thing, unfortunately, not everybody wins, but as I told the runner-up to Leslie's article, that there are always genealogical and historical societies out there looking for articles for their newsletters and journals and things, and I suggested that they send it to a local society where the family lived, and that's what she did with hers. So
great.
we're getting close to the end. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you think we should know?
Oh,
I'm
man.
kind of stepping on Arlene's toes here, but
I could go for hours. I could go for hours about this, and I think one of the high points of this whole experience was that my family was with me at this event. You know, my mother is aging. I'm glad she was in good health. She could travel. My children were with me, and there's an ironic twist that the conference that year was in Richmond, Virginia, the former capital of the Confederacy, and that was. It was sweet.
One of the other things too, we showed the cover, and I heard that this is the first time, or the first time in a long time, that someone who is still living is pictured on the cover. Unfortunately, her uncle has passed away, but her mother is still with us, and on the cover. So.
Well, thank you very much. We've got a few more seconds. If there's anything else that you can think of, was there a particular low spot or something? Or?
Oh, well, yeah, but that's we'll just let that go.
Did you ever pay off the IOUs for Christmas?
I did. It did. And it wasn't with fruitcake. I redeemed myself. I redeemed myself.
You got copies of this to send to your whole family and
I
show
did.
them why
I did.
you.
They were supportive. They were quite supportive and really amazed. And oh yeah, well you did this. Yeah, I did this.
So now you're going to do some other branch of the family?
Oh yeah. I've turned my attention to my father's family. My father's from Pennsylvania, with some roots in Virginia as well. And just as in my mother's family, there's a parental line that's enslaved and a parental line that was free in the antebellum years.
Well, that's great. It's really been, I've learned a lot. It's been very interesting hearing your story, and it's wonderful to get it published. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
You're welcome.